Hi everybody, let's talk about the case study of Mexico to USA international migration stream. A bit of background, there were limited movements back in the 1800s to the 1900s, but there were some surges in the 1920s and 1950s after the World Wars. There became persistent migration only since 1990s, and in 2013, there's 11.6 million Mexicans living in the USA. For the character of the migrants, it's primarily economic migrants, people moving for work, for labor, and it was encouraged first by the Bracero program from 1942 to 1964, basically because the US soldiers were in the World Wars, in Vietnam War and stuff. The farmers in the USA were lacking, so they needed some more migrant workers to help in the farms, and therefore the Bracero program was there to encourage Mexican guest workers, as they call it, to work in the farms. But work has now shifted from more agricultural work in the Bracero program to more construction and manufacturing nowadays. There are also some illegal immigrants. There was few before 1980s, but in the 1980s there was an economic crisis and high population growth in Mexico. And because Border Patrol had limited manpower, and also there were some links between Mexican communities and US employers, keep in mind there was no penalties for employers from hiring illegal immigrants. So it was pretty cheap labor, and they did so. So there was a lot of illegal immigration in the 1980s. So they passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act in the 1986, and that legalized 2.7 million illegal immigrants in the USA, and then set penalties for US employers who hire illegal immigrants to discourage that. For the patterns of this migration stream, it's primarily dominated by men, but it's quite narrow, with 52.6% men compared to 47.4% women. And the age-wise, it's quite old. The age has increased over time, but the median age for men is 44 years old. Median for women is 46. As for the geographical concentration, where they move to is primarily the bordering states. So California at 34, Texas at 26, and Arizona at 5%. The causes of any migration is because of push and pull factors, the interaction behind them. And the first thing is crime. So in Mexico, crime is a really big thing with, as you can see here, 218.5 murders per million compared to the US, 42 murders per million. So they perceive that their lives are in danger, so they might move out. There were also droughts in 2011 to 2012, which affected 70% of Mexico, primarily northern states like Chihuahua, which is close to the United States. Therefore, the distance is a factor that plays in there as well. And because of crop failure, they ran out of food. They decided to move to USA for safety. Wages-wise, in Mexico, the minimum wage is $13.55 a day compared to $7.25 an hour in the USA. So if you just work 2 hours in the USA, you will earn more than the minimum wage in Mexico. For education as well, in the USA, there's a lot of educational institutions, such as the University of California in Los Angeles as an example. And since then, 20% of Hispanics are college students in the USA. As for healthcare, in Mexico, there are only 2.6 physicians per thousand compared to America's 3.6 physicians per thousand. So there's more physicians around in the USA, and probably better standard of healthcare as well. Therefore, they moved to the USA to seek some healthcare aid. Talking about impacts on the source, so on Mexico, it collects a lot of remittances, 63.3 billion in remittances in 2023, which is a lot of money. It's around like 15% of Mexico's revenue then. And 60% of the migrants who return back from the USA return back with skills, maybe social skills, maybe English skills, and that can be helpful for Mexico's service industry. It also reduces the unemployment pressures on Mexico. So in 1985, as you can see here, its unemployment was 7.1%, so it lacked a lot of jobs. But because the Mexicans can just migrate to the USA, there's not much of a pressure needed to create so many jobs all of a sudden, and it has reduced to 2.8% in 2023. There's also less public service trains because less demand for such. Therefore, there's greater availability and it's more adequate for the population. However, there is 1.5 million net female surplus and economic active. This means there's much more females than males because, as you can see here, more men migrate than women. Therefore, this has slowly over time created a sex imbalance towards the females, and that might have some long-term implications in the birth rate. Negatives as well, brain drain. So in the USA, This is for Mexican statistics. 442,000 Mexicans in the USA have a bachelor's degrees, and 110,000 Mexicans in the USA have masters and doctorates, which would have been more useful for Mexico if they stayed in Mexico. But they are in the USA, so it's draining the brain. As for the impacts on the USA on the destination, positives are you get a very low wage labor force, a cheap labor force, and it's large. As you can see with this wage gap over here, they're willing to accept the minimum wage essentially, and therefore it's cheap labor. You can grow your economy better for the USA. And also there's a spread of culture and diversity. It's always better to learn an extra language, can speak openly and stuff, so that's positive. And also the immigrants, especially if they are legal immigrants and they are documented, they do pay taxes, and immigrants in total, not just Mexicans, paid a total of 330 billion in income tax in 2021 to the USA. However, there are also negatives. So in the 1990 to 2015, more than 2.5 million acres of land along the US-Mexican border were urbanized. So there are some environmental implications with that. And also there's a strain on US public services, on especially welfare services. 33.9% of Mexican immigrants households use welfare programs compared to only 14.8% of locals, Native Americans, who do use the welfare programs. So it's kind of like the US taxpayers who are paying for these immigrants, and it seems like that. Which then leads on to this over here, more xenophobia, more anti-Hispanic hate crimes. From 2018 to 2019, there was a 9% increase in anti-Hispanic hate crimes. So this sums up the case study of Mexico to US international migration stream. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.